Cole sprang up in the middle of dinner, hurling a glass of wine at the wall just inches from my daughter's face, then shoved Rachel down into her chair and slapped her over and over right in front of me. Before I could react, his mother, Veronica, slowly clapped her hands as if applauding a brilliant performance and said coldly, "My son finally knows how to teach his wife." In that moment, my blood froze. But while they thought I was in shock, I quietly switched on the recording mode inside my coat pocket. And they had no idea. Tonight wouldn't just end Rachel's marriage. It would unearth a family secret buried for 12 years and pull all of us into a war no one could have predicted. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I don't even remember how I got up from that heavy wooden chair. Everything in the dining room seemed to spin. The soft yellow ceiling lights, the expensive curtains, the smell of roasted meat and wine, all of it blended into a suffocating haze that forced me to take a deep breath just to keep from collapsing. I had seen plenty of violence in my years as an attorney, but never, not once, did I imagine witnessing my own daughter being slapped by her husband right before my eyes. And even less could I imagine an older woman like Veronica, a mother, a widow, clapping her hands in approval. Rachel was still dazed, her eyes red, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Her hair was a tangled mess from being yanked. I could hear her shallow, shaky breaths, as if one more gasp would break her body entirely. I forced myself to stay calm. If I spiraled, they would win. If I let emotion lead, I would miss the details I needed. I had coached countless clients through their worst moments, and now that same advice returned to save me. Slowly, clearly, I said, "Rachel, stand up, we're leaving." Cole laughed as if I had told a dull joke. Veronica tilted her head, a sick delight gleaming in her eyes. "You think you can take her that easily?" she asked, voice dripping with challenge. I didn't answer. I simply placed my hand on Rachel's shoulder and pried Cole's fingers off. He didn't resist. Perhaps he thought I was just a 62-year-old woman not worth his energy. But he would learn, very soon, that he had laid a hand on the only child of a mother who would burn the whole world down if necessary. I guided Rachel out of that massive house, the same place I had once believed would be her safe haven. I remembered Veronica's words at the wedding. Our family always welcomes her. Looking back, it sounded more like a warning than a promise. As we stepped outside, Rachel leaned on me like a woman drained after battle. The cold air bit at our faces, our breath turning into white mist. I helped her into the car, shut the door gently, then hurried around to the driver's side. The moment the door closed, Rachel collapsed into sobs like a child. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to see that." Her voice was fractured, trembling as if every word caused physical pain. I cupped her face and whispered, "No, Rachel, you did nothing wrong. No woman is ever at fault for being hit." She clung to me, her tears soaking into my thick winter coat. I let her cry, let the fear she'd bottled up for so long finally spill out. But I knew comfort wasn't enough. I needed to get her away. Fast. We'd only driven a few minutes when Rachel gasped and spoke through broken breaths. "Mom, this wasn't the first time." I slammed on the brakes so hard the car nearly skidded on the frozen road. I turned to her, my heart seizing. "Cole has done this before? For how long?" She lowered her head. 3 years. Since the first year we got married. It took me several seconds to absorb that number. 3 years. 3 years she lived in fear, controlled, belittled, beaten, while pretending everything was fine. I felt rage shake my fingertips, but I didn't let myself explode. Not yet. I inhaled deeply, pulled the car over, and grabbed my phone. Yes, this is Linda Harrington. I need to report domestic violence. The victim is my daughter. My voice was steady, unshaken. When the police arrived, Veronica was already on the porch as if performing her daily script. I heard her tell an officer, "Rachel has mental issues. She's sensitive. She knocked over the glass herself and fell." I stood less than 7 feet away, stunned by how effortlessly she lied. Cole loomed behind her, feigning drunkenness, though I knew he was sober. An officer tried speaking to Rachel, but she was trembling too hard to answer. I stepped forward and handed him my phone. "Officer, I have evidence." Veronica shot me a razor-sharp look. She hissed, just loud enough for me to hear, "You're making a very big mistake, Linda." But I said only, "We'll see who's mistaken." Lieutenant Parker, someone I knew from past cases before I retired, listened intently to the recording. His face tightened at Veronica's "teach his wife" comment, then shifted toward Rachel's bruised cheek. He didn't say much. He just documented everything and instructed me to keep Rachel safe. "Linda, this case won't be easy," he murmured. "The Matthews family has influence, but hold on to every piece of evidence. I'll be in touch." I nodded. As the police left, Veronica gave me one last chilling stare. "You have no idea what my family can do." I didn't respond. I just held Rachel's hand and led her to the car. But inside, I knew. She wasn't lying. The Matthews family would strike back, and they wouldn't be gentle. That night, after Rachel fell asleep in her old high school bedroom, I sat alone in the kitchen. My small home in Columbus, Ohio, had never felt so silent. The clock ticked, and I stared at a pot of boiling water, forgetting to turn off the stove. I glanced at Rachel's sleeping face, still swollen and bruised. The sight hurt so deeply it felt physical. Quietly, I whispered, "I will tear that family apart if I have to." I knew I had entered a lopsided war, a single mother against a wealthy, powerful family with a dark past, but I also knew I had no way back. When I replayed the recording, I heard the line Veronica muttered, thinking I was far enough not to hear. "Just like I did with my husband back then." A chill ran down my spine. I realized I had stumbled onto something far bigger than domestic violence, something that could destroy the entire Matthews empire. And more importantly, this door, once opened, could never be shut again. I sat in that kitchen for nearly an hour after the recording ended, my hands still trembling. Her words rang in my ears like cold metal scraping. Just like I did with my husband back then. Abusers sometimes speak nonsense in anger, but Veronica, she wasn't the type to say anything without calculation. She measured every glance, every breath, which made those words heavier, denser, and far more dangerous. The next morning, when Rachel walked downstairs, I saw the change immediately, in her posture, in her eyes. She no longer looked like a woman pretending to be strong. She looked hollow, like someone who survived the storm but wasn't sure she'd survive the sunrise. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. I pulled out a chair and placed a cup of tea before her, softening my voice. "Rachel, you need to tell me everything. All of it." She stayed quiet for a long time. Not until the steam from her tea rose and her eyes brimmed with tears did she finally speak. "Veronica." "She was always there, Mom. Always." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "During the first week after the wedding, she gave Cole a plan, a marriage plan. You heard me right. It had a timeline for having kids, how to manage finances, who got to make decisions. Cole treated it like scripture. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling shakily. She asked me to send her my pay stub every month so she could help us manage things. When I refused, she said I was disrespecting their family. Heat flooded my face. Veronica wasn't just controlling, she was a seasoned manipulator. Rachel continued, her voice flat as if she had rehearsed these thoughts 100 times alone. Cole started telling me to drop friends, said they were bad influences. Then he criticized my job at the lab, said it had no future. I believed him. I thought he wanted what was best for me. That was when I knew. Rachel had been eroded mentally, little by little. Abusers rarely start with violence. They start by shrinking their victim, piece by piece. I squeezed her hand. You are not to blame, not even a little. Rachel bit her lip, eyes wet. I knew what came next would be the hardest part, but truth was necessary. Once Rachel was steady enough, I went into my small office, opened my laptop, and created the first file. Case file. Rachel. Harrington Matthews. I hadn't practiced law formally in years, but my instincts were sharp as ever. I titled the document and began listing everything. Visible injuries, exact dates and times. Witness myself. Photos. I took pictures of every bruise, every swollen mark. Audio evidence. The original recording and one backup. My fingers flew across the keyboard, not sloppy, just fast. Every keystroke felt like a vow. Veronica Matthews would not erase this truth. As I was reviewing the timestamps, my phone rang. Veronica's name appeared. I let it ring a few seconds before picking up. I didn't want her thinking I was waiting. Linda, she began, her voice sugar-sweet enough to make my skin crawl. We're both adults. I believe we can resolve this. Gently. What do you want? I asked flatly. I want to protect your daughter, she said, stretching each word as if offering charity. Rachel isn't suitable for our family. She's weak, emotional, and Cole, he's simply stressed. If you insist on escalating this, we will have to reveal some unflattering things about Rachel. I let out a thin, humorless laugh. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening, she replied lightly, as if discussing living room decor. I'm warning you. Once my family acts, Rachel won't just lose her husband, she'll lose her job, her reputation, her chances at a normal life. I don't want that for her, but if you push me, I'll have no choice. My voice was calm, calmer than I expected. You might want to be careful, Veronica. I'm recording this call. Silence. Then she hung up. That silence was more terrifying than any threat. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Parker called. Rachel needs to come in to give a statement. Without it, we can't move forward. Rachel stood beside me, hearing every word, her face drained of color. Mom, if work finds out, they'll judge me. The lab is downsizing. I can't lose my job. I held her shoulders gently. Don't worry about losing a job. Worry about keeping your life and taking your freedom back. But I knew that when a woman's spirit has been worn down for years, logic can't overpower fear. Rachel wasn't just afraid of Cole. She was afraid the world would turn its back on her the way Veronica had taught her from the start. No one will believe you. That invisible pressure kills confidence faster than any slap. That evening, after Rachel went upstairs to rest, I heard a car stop in front of the house. I opened the door and saw Veronica standing there in her expensive fur coat, her face calm as if she were visiting a neighbor. I warned you, Linda, she said bluntly. You're ruining that girl's life. My son just needs time. Rachel is fragile. She imagines things. I folded my arms. "What do you want here?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My husband did not die of a heart condition." The word sliced through the air like a blade. I stood silent for several seconds, forcing myself not to react. Veronica gave a thin smile. He hurt himself with foolish decisions. Sometimes, women like us must protect our families at any cost, understand? "I didn't kill my husband," I said, "and I don't encourage anyone to do that." "Not everyone has the luxury of such morals, Linda," she replied. "My family survives because of difficult decisions." Then she left, the cold wind swirling behind her, as if the ground under my feet had cracked open. Rachel heard the last part of the conversation as she came down the stairs. She burst into tears, clinging to my shoulders. "Mom, I dragged you into all of this. I'm sorry." I placed my hand on her hair and stroked gently. "Don't apologize. I chose to stand with you, and I'm not backing down." But I knew I needed to prepare, truly prepare. That very night, I sent copies of the dinner recording, the phone call with Veronica, and my preliminary documents to an old colleague, Nora Campbell, now a federal prosecutor. I wrote only, "If anything happens to me, release all of this to the press." Nora replied immediately, "Understood. Stay safe." When Rachel fell asleep again, I opened my laptop and began researching the Matthews name. I didn't know what I was looking for, but my instincts told me this wasn't just about domestic violence, and I was right. Page after page, document after document, murky charity networks, unusually large political donations, missing pages from Thomas Matthews's medical file 12 years ago. The more I read, the more I felt as though someone was standing right behind me. The darkness around this story wasn't just thick, it moved, and I understood. We weren't just fighting a controlling family. We were touching a deep pit that people had tried to bury for more than a decade. I stared at my laptop until my eyes burned, unable to look away. The documents I unearthed about the Matthews family chilled me, even though the kitchen still held the warmth of the earlier tea. Everything I had suspected about Veronica, her cruelty, her control, her coldness, was only the surface. What I was seeing now went far beyond anything I had braced myself for. The name Matthew Matthews, Veronica's late husband, appeared in the death records like a shadow no one had mentioned in years. A familiar face from old community work more than a decade ago, then suddenly gone. I remembered seeing his picture at Cole's house. A gentle middle-aged man with a strained smile, like someone trying to hide relentless exhaustion. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now... I opened the forensic report. The first line made me press a hand over my mouth to keep my breath from escaping. Multiple contusions inconsistent with accidental fall. Multiple bruises not consistent with a bathroom slip. Not one, not two. More than 8 bruises, in places no simple fall could cause, on his back, his arms, his lower abdomen, half-moon shapes like someone's knuckles had left the marks. None of this appeared in the report Veronica presented at the funeral. I swallowed hard. The next lines were like a knife cutting through the silence. Possible signs of struggle, signs of resistance. I closed my eyes for a second, then forced them open. I needed to stay sharp for Rachel. A handwritten note from the responding officer was attached. One line made my skin crawl. Neighbor reports loud argument night before death. Woman shouting, thuds. A major fight, followed by a death-ruled accidental bathroom fall. And the person who benefited most financially was Veronica. I read on. Widow requested immediate cremation, refused second examination. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying not to tremble. Pieces were falling into place in a terrifying pattern. She controlled her family, controlled her son, controlled her husband's estate, and now she wanted to control Rachel's future, if I allowed it. I remembered the way Cole stiffened every time Veronica entered the room. His body went rigid, lips pressed tight, like a child caught doing wrong. Grown men don't fear their mothers like that, unless that control had been carved into their bones. Maybe that was why Cole believed controlling Rachel was normal. He was raised inside a cage, and men raised in cages rarely learn how to love. But understanding does not mean forgiving. I closed the laptop, stood, and gathered the entire stack of documents. I knew exactly what I had to do. Lieutenant Parker opened the door when I knocked. His face was tired, lined with years of long cases, but his eyes were still sharp, the eyes of a man who lived by principle and didn't bow to power. "I expected you to call in the morning," he said, letting me in. I couldn't wait. I placed the documents on his desk. "You need to see this right now." He read carefully, page by page. His jaw tightened. When he reached the neighbor's statement, he set the papers down and looked up. "Linda, do you know what you're stepping into?" "I do." "The Matthews family. They're not easy to take on. And Veronica is not just a controlling mother. She may be a killer." He was silent for several seconds, then said, "I'll open an independent investigation. We'll need witnesses, forensic review, and I'll find a way," I interrupted. "Just don't let them bury this." He nodded. "I promise." That promise meant more to me than anything. When I got home, Rachel sat at the dining table, her hands holding her head. The warm light softened her face, making her look younger, more fragile. She looked up. "Mom, where did you go? I was scared." I sat beside her and held her hand tightly. "Rachel, I need you to be strong. This goes deeper than we thought." She blinked, trying to read my expression. "Did you find something?" I told her everything, every word like shards of glass slicing the air. When I reached the part about signs of struggle, Rachel shivered as if someone had plunged her into ice water. No way. Mom, she couldn't have. She couldn't finish. I pulled her into my arms as her breathing grew unsteady. "Listen to me," I whispered, stroking her back. "We cannot be afraid. The truth is the only thing that will get you out of that family." But Rachel shook her head repeatedly, panicked. "Mom, if she killed her husband, she could kill us. She has power, money, people protecting her." I held her shoulders firmly, forcing her to meet my eyes. "Remember last night? You almost died under Cole's hands. If we back down now, you'll never escape. I would rather die than see you go back into that house." She broke down, sobbing into my shoulder. I slept only a few hours before dawn broke. As I was preparing tea, I heard a car stop outside. My heart jumped. Veronica again? But no, this car was black, with no Matthews family plate. The mail carrier left a thin envelope. No sender. I opened it. Inside was a small black USB and a single note. "You need to hear this if you want to stay alive." My chest tightened. I didn't plug the USB into my main laptop. I used an old offline computer. The audio began to play, and I froze. The voice I recognized instantly. Veronica, calm, cold, not a tremor of guilt, as if she were describing a flower arrangement. "He deserved to die. Long ago, I only gave him a little push. Men sometimes need to be reminded who runs things." I covered my mouth to stifle my breath. Rachel had come halfway down the stairs, heard me, and approached. "Mom, what is it?" I didn't answer. I handed her the headphones, and when she heard, I only gave him a little push. Her knees buckled beneath her. Mom, she killed him. She really did. I caught her before she hit the floor. This is the evidence we needed, the only weapon strong enough to make her pay. But I knew, right then and there, we had crossed a line we could never return from. Veronica was no longer just an emotional abuser, no longer just the mother of a violent man. She was a killer. And killers will do anything to bury the truth. I stared at the USB, then at my trembling daughter. I understood that from this moment forward, the darkness the Matthews family had hidden for over a decade had fully risen, and we, two lone women, stood at the center of the storm. I gently stroked Rachel's shoulder as she sat on the floor, staring at the USB like it was a venomous snake. I knew she was trying to grasp how someone could say such things and still live a polished public life, attending charity events and smiling for cameras. But I understood. I had met people like her in my career, powerful individuals with two faces, one for the world and one for the unfortunate souls trapped with them. But Veronica was unlike anyone I had ever confronted. She felt like a thinking shadow, one that chose its moment to strike, and I knew she wouldn't sit still. Just 2 days after we received the USB, the counterattack began, swift, cold, and precise as a blade across the throat. That morning, as I was preparing breakfast, the doorbell rang. Rachel answered, and I heard a man's voice say, "Rachel Harrington, this is a summons. You are accused of providing false information in a domestic violence report." Rachel froze, her hands shaking so badly the paper nearly slipped from her fingers. I rushed over and took it from her. The words on the legal document seemed to dance before my eyes. False reporting, fabrication of domestic violence incident. I inhaled deeply, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "This is intimidation, Rachel. Don't panic." But her eyes were filled with panic. "Mom, they're saying I made it up. They want to turn me into a criminal." I pulled her into my arms. "I'm here. We'll handle this." But not even 2 hours later, the second wave of the storm hit. Rachel's phone rang. I stood beside her as she put the call on speaker. "Miss Harrington, this is Human Resources. Due to the current situation affecting the company's reputation, we regret to inform you that we must place you on temporary suspension, pending an internal review." Rachel's face went pale. "But I'm the victim. I didn't do anything wrong." "We understand, but the company must protect its image. Thank you for your understanding." The call ended. Rachel dropped the phone onto the table, covering her head with both hands as if trying to keep the world from collapsing. "I'm going to lose my job," she whispered. "No, you're not," I said, though my chest felt heavy as stone. "They're just playing dirty." I had never seen my daughter look as small as she did in that moment. The next day, while I was working in my small office, an old room in a 2-story building next to the city library, 3 men in suits walked in. "IRS, we're here for an immediate inspection." My heart sank. "Do you have a warrant?" They did, complete and legal. They tore apart everything, files, computers, even my personal cabinet. In 32 years of practicing law, I had never once been audited in such a brutal manner. They hauled out boxes filled with documents. I knew exactly where this came from. The IRS does not suddenly care about a small attorney like me. Rachel texted me, "Mom, are you okay?" They came to my workplace too. I replied, "I'm fine. Don't worry. This is Veronica's move." I typed it like a cold fact, but my hands were shaking so badly the letters warped. That night, I received an email from the Ohio Bar Association. Complaint received. Ms. Harrington is suspected of abusing her authority and improperly influencing a criminal investigation. I froze. Who filed the complaint? I didn't need to ask. Veronica had begun turning over every weapon she had. This was no longer a personal dispute. This was a war designed to destroy my career, my reputation, and my spirit. While I fought the silent attacks, Rachel faced something even crueler. Her friends, the ones who took wedding photos with her, attended every birthday, said they loved her like a sister, began pulling away. I heard a voicemail playing on Rachel's phone as I walked into the living room. "Rachel, I really don't understand what you're doing. Cole is a good man. You're ruining his career. We don't want to be dragged into this drama. Please don't contact us anymore." Rachel shut off the phone mid-message. "I don't have anyone left, Mom. They all believe him." I held her hand. "It's okay. You still have me." But I knew for someone young like Rachel, losing friends could hurt even more than losing a job. Veronica didn't stop there. Saturday morning, while I was taking Rachel for additional injury documentation, a post went viral online. A worthless gold digger used Cole to latch onto money and turned on him when it didn't work out. Failed at her job, so she fabricated abuse for a payout. The account posting it? Veronica Matthews, a woman in her 70s using social media like a sharpened weapon. Rachel cried right there in the car, "Mom, I'm done. I can't take this anymore." I cupped her cheek. "Rachel, this is exactly what they want, to break you so you give up." She had lost weight. Her eyes were sunken. Her hair was thinning from the stress. This wasn't just external pressure. It was a battle inside her own soul. And I understood then. The Matthews family didn't want to destroy her reputation. They wanted to destroy her belief in herself. The next day, I met with Lieutenant Parker at the station. He looked at me with a rare expression of sympathy. "Linda, I'll be honest," he said, handing me a cup of hot coffee. "The Matthews family has deep connections in this city. You're dealing with something bigger than you think." "I know," I replied, "but I'm not withdrawing the report." He nodded. "I'll support you as much as I can within the boundaries of my job, but you need to prepare for more hits. This is just the opening act." I understood. I'd been in the field long enough to know that when the powerful are cornered, they strike back, by any means, legal or not. When I got home, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not legal briefs this time, but an event journal, documenting every threat, every call, every detail Veronica tried to bury. In my profession, when you fear being railroaded, there's only one way to survive: record everything. I wrote until the clock struck 3 a.m. I wrote until my hands hurt, until I heard Rachel crying softly in her room. When I finally set down my pen, I knew this was only beginning. Veronica had only used her left hand. She still had an entire arsenal waiting. I turned off the lights and stood at the window overlooking the dark yard. A cold wind shook the branches. I felt as though someone was watching us from the shadows. I took a deep breath, clenched my fist, and whispered, "If they want a war, I'll show them what a mother can do when her child is pushed to the edge." 'Cause I knew the real battle had only just begun. I still remember clearly the morning I decided to dig deeper into the death of Mr. Matthew Matthews. While making coffee, I opened the documents I'd photographed from the county's public records, the ones Veronica surely assumed the world had forgotten. But when I enlarged the scanned pages, something made my pulse tighten. There was mention of an old will, but not a single line about a newer one. That was far too strange for a man with his level of wealth. I called the county records office and asked casually, For the Matthew Matthews case, where is the 2011 will file? The person on the other end paused so long I thought the line had dropped. Ma'am, no will was ever filed. I knew that couldn't be true. A wealthy man active in the community dying suddenly would absolutely have left a will, at least a draft. But the file was blank. No trace. No copy. There was only one explanation. The will had been deliberately removed, and I didn't need 3 guesses to know who benefited most. That afternoon, I drove to a place I had long avoided, Maplewood Lake, where Mr. Matthews supposedly slipped and fell before losing consciousness. I stood before the still water, reflecting the gray sky, trying to imagine a healthy, middle-aged man simply losing his footing on such a harmless stretch of rocks. Nothing about the setting suggested danger, only silence. I didn't know how long I stood there before a voice behind me said, "What are you looking for out here?" I turned. A man in his 50s wearing a ranger uniform leaned against the wooden railing near the water. "I'm just trying to understand what happened here years ago," I said honestly. He studied me, then exhaled. "I remember him. Matthew Matthews. I was first on site after the call came in." I steadied myself. "Did you see anything unusual?" He bent and snapped a dry twig in half. "The night before," he said slowly, "I saw him and Mrs. Matthews arguing loudly, right there by the rocks." He pointed to the east side of the lake, very heated. She kept standing in his space, like she was cornering him. My heartbeat quickened. "Did you report that to police at the time?" He shook his head, eyes slipping away. "No one asked, and honestly, I didn't want trouble with a rich family." His words sent chills through me. People didn't stay silent because they didn't know. They stayed silent because they were afraid. When I returned home, Rachel was at the kitchen table, her laptop open, her eyes more alert than they had been in days. I saw a faint spark in her, a flicker I feared she had lost. "What are you working on?" Rachel turned the screen toward me. "I'm gathering emails and messages from Cole. Some have threats, and some I never dared read twice." I squeezed her hand, proud as if she had risen from a deep abyss. "You're doing well," I whispered. Rachel shook her head. "Not just that. I found something. You need to see." She opened a new folder. Inside were dozens of video files from security cameras, but not ones from her house. Cole installed hidden cameras in the house. I never knew until today when I accessed his cloud account. He forgot to change the password. I froze. "Rachel, how long were you being watched?" She opened a file dated last year, then another from 3 years prior. "I don't know," she said in despair, "but it looks like years." I covered my mouth, not from shock, but from choking fury. "You weren't just a victim of physical abuse," I said, steadying my voice. "You were a victim of illegal surveillance. This is a federal crime." Rachel inhaled sharply, tears streaming, but eyes no longer cast downward. "I want to fight, Mom." It was the first time she said the words herself, and her voice made me believe she wouldn't break. The next day, I brought everything to Lieutenant Parker, the old forensic report, the ranger's account, the anonymous letter, the USB, Cole's hidden cameras. After I finished presenting, he leaned back in his chair, hands clasped before his mouth. "Linda," he said gravely, "this is no longer a suspicion. This is a homicide case with clear signs of cover-up." I nodded. "I know. And I need you to understand, you're on the right path. But the closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes." I met his eyes steadily. "I accept that." Parker took a deep breath and turned on his recorder to formally begin assembling evidence. I knew at that moment everything had crossed into a threshold we could never return from. That night, while I was typing more entries into the event journal, a faint metallic sound echoed from the back door. Rachel was asleep. I walked quietly down the stairs. The porch light cast a dim orange glow across the kitchen tiles. The back door was ajar. My lungs tightened. "Hello," I called out, but no one answered. I turned on every light in the house, checking room by room, window by window. Nothing was missing. There were no signs of theft. Only a small piece of paper placed neatly on the kitchen counter. Only 3 words written in black marker: "Step back." I lost my breath for a few seconds. A coldness spread from the back of my neck down my spine, as if someone had placed a hand on my throat. But that fear didn't weaken me, it only made me angrier. The next morning, Rachel saw me installing an extra safety lock on the back door. "Did something happen, Mom?" I didn't lie. "They pried the door open last night, didn't take anything, just a warning." Rachel panicked and wrapped her arms around me. "Mom, we have to stop." I placed my hands on her cheeks. "Rachel, if I step back, who will save you? Who will stop them from doing this to someone else?" She froze, and in her eyes I saw fear and respect blending together. "Aren't you scared?" "Of course I'm scared," I said honestly, "but fear isn't a reason to give up." I called Parker and reported the incident. Just half an hour later, he arrived at my house with 2 other officers. After checking the signs of tampering, he said, "They want you to know they're watching you. This is classic pressure tactics." "I understand," I replied. "From now on," Parker said, "the 2 of you will have nighttime patrol surveillance, and I'll request special protective measures for you if the case moves forward." I didn't ask if. I asked, "When do we take the next step?" Parker looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Very soon, Linda. You're closer to the truth than anyone else has ever dared to get." I looked out the window. The sky had gone dark. The wind was strong, and the old oak tree in the yard leaned toward the house as if trying to warn us. I knew deep in my bones that Parker was right. The closer we got to the truth, the more desperate the Matthews family became. And desperate people, especially those with money and power, are the most dangerous of all. But I also knew this, as clearly as my own heartbeat. I wasn't fighting for justice anymore. I was fighting to save my daughter's soul, and for that reason, I would never step back. I have never forgotten the morning of the disciplinary hearing, a morning I knew the other side wanted to turn into a sentence hanging over my head to scare me into staying silent forever. The Ohio Bar Association headquarters always felt formal, but that day it felt larger, colder, full of watching eyes. I didn't tremble, but every muscle in my body felt stretched tight like a wire. When I walked into the wide room with long wooden benches and the counsel seated in front, I understood that even a small misstep could destroy my 32-year career. Rachel wanted to come with me, but I told her to stay home with Parker. I didn't want her to witness any more humiliation. I set my bag down and opened the notebook where I had recorded every incident, every threat, every shady move the Matthews family had made. I was prepared to defend myself to the end, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened when the back door of the room opened. An older man, tall and slender but slow in his steps, leaning on a dark wooden cane, walked in. Light from the window fell across his face, a face I felt I had seen before, half hidden in an old photograph. The man stopped in the center of the room, seemed to gather his breath, and spoke in a hoarse but firm voice. "I am Edward Matthews, brother of Matthew Matthews. I want to testify." The room went so silent I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. The council members turned to look at one another, then at me, as though wondering if this was something I had orchestrated. But I was more shocked than anyone. The name Matthews, that family name, was the very thing Veronica had always guarded like an impenetrable fortress. Edward Matthews slowly took a seat in the back row, bowing his head slightly toward me in a small gesture of greeting. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, but his eyes were bright and sharp, like someone who had carried a truth for too long. The chairperson spoke. "Mr. Matthews, please tell us why you are here today." The old man lifted his head. "Because I must make things right. I have been silent for 12 years. My heart skipped a beat. He began speaking slowly, as if each sentence dragged a painful memory with it. My sister-in-law, Veronica. She was smart, sharp, but after she married Matthew, I saw her change. She controlled the family, controlled the money, and especially controlled Matthew. My brother tried to separate from her 3 times, but each time, Veronica found a way to pull him back. The council exchanged glances. I listened to every word like swallowing ice. "I saw injuries on Matthew," he continued. "He lied, said he fell, hit a door, slipped off a ladder. But I knew. I knew because I once saw her shove him into a wall when she thought no one was watching." The council member frowned. "You're saying Veronica was physically violent?" Edward nodded, gripping his cane. "Not just that. She manipulated him psychologically. She made him believe that leaving her meant losing everything, his son, his company, his reputation, and she really had the means to make that true." I clenched my hands slightly as I listened, not surprised, not startled, just hearing the confirmation of what my instincts had long whispered. The night Matthew died. Edward took a long breath, his gaze drifting far away, back to Maplewood Lake that night. "He called me an hour before. He said he had found a lawyer and was going to file for divorce. He wanted to protect Cole. He wanted out." I held my breath. When I arrived, Veronica was on the porch. She coldly told me to go home. The next morning, Matthew was dead. She said it was an accident. "Did you believe it was an accident?" the chairperson asked. "From the moment I saw the bruises on Matthew's wrist at the funeral home," Edward said, voice shaking, "I knew it wasn't." Another member asked, "Then why did you stay silent for 12 years? Edward bowed his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. "Because Veronica threatened my family. She said if I opened my mouth, I would have nothing left in this world to hold on to. And when I looked into her eyes, I believed her." A painful weight rose in my chest, an elderly man carrying guilt, fear, and silence for more than a decade. Edward looked directly at me. "I sent you the USB. I recorded her conversation with someone she once hired as home help. I sent it to make amends. I knew she would do to your daughter what she did to my brother if you didn't act." A shiver ran through me. His appearance wasn't just a turning point, it was a testimony from someone who had run from the truth for far too long. The chairperson whispered to the council, then announced, "While these new details are verified, the disciplinary investigation against Ms. Harrington will be paused. We do not see evidence at this time that she abused her authority as alleged." I closed my eyes for a brief moment. Not relief, just the ability to breathe again. When I opened them, Edward was watching me, his gray-brown eyes warm but sorrowful. I walked toward him. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice tight. "No one blames you." He shook his head. "Oh yes, I blame myself. But now I want to make things right. If you and that police officer can protect me, I'm willing to be an official witness." "I promise," I said, placing my hand on his wrist, feeling his bones fragile but strong. We will protect you." Edward pressed his lips together. "Veronica won't sit still." "I know." He studied me for a moment, then said, as gently as a breeze, "But you're stronger than you think, Linda. That's why I came today." When I stepped out of the hearing room, the air outside felt clearer, as if the sky had finally opened after days of storm clouds. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the silence before the storm. I stood on the steps, watching cars move along the avenue, and felt that something fundamental had shifted. Not just that we had more evidence or a new witness, but that I was no longer alone. A man who had carried 12 years of guilt had chosen to step into the light, and I knew that from the moment Edward Matthews walked into that room, the fortified world Veronica had built had begun to crack. When I got into my car and called Parker, he let out a stunned sigh. "Linda, you just brought us the biggest missing piece." "We have to protect him," I said. "I'll arrange it, but you need to be careful too. Once Veronica feels cornered, she'll be more dangerous than ever." I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, tired but steady. "I'm ready." As I drove home, the late afternoon sun cast a soft gold across the road, making everything seem gentler. But inside me, a slow-burning fire spread, not anger anymore, but hope. For the first time since this battle began, I felt a real chance, and that feeling scared me, because as Parker had said and as life had taught me, when the powerful sense they're losing everything, they never go down quietly. Veronica Matthews must have felt the shift, and she would strike back. I just didn't know how, but I was ready. I still remember the moment Parker called, his voice heavy as if weighed down by stones. I was making chamomile tea for Rachel when the phone buzzed on the table. When I saw his name on the screen, I knew immediately something had happened, and I was right, but never imagined the extent. "Linda, you need to stay calm," Parker said. I'm used to hearing that. I tried to steady my voice. "What happened?" He paused. "Cole Matthews just violated the restraining order. Badly." I set the cup down, my heart pounding. "What did he do?" Parker exhaled. "He broke into Rachel's old house, destroyed everything." The kitchen floor under my feet felt colder. "Rachel wasn't there, right?" "No, but you should prepare yourself for what he did." When we arrived at Rachel's old house, the police had already taped off the yard. I held her hand tightly as she walked in. I thought she had prepared herself, but no one could be prepared for the sight before us. The living room looked like a storm had torn through it. The sofa slashed open, wooden furniture smashed into pieces, family photos, pictures of Rachel as a child, pictures of the two of us on our first trip after my divorce, were thrown to the floor, glass shattered everywhere. The crystal glasses Cole once gave her for Christmas shattered. But the worst part wasn't the broken objects. It was the bedroom door. On it, painted in dark red like blood, were the words, "I will take back what's mine." Rachel staggered back as if someone had slapped her hard. I caught her before her legs gave out. "Cole used to be in this room every day," she whispered, "and now it looks like he wants to erase every trace of me." I held her close. "Sweetheart, nothing here belongs to you anymore. The things that truly belong to you, freedom, safety, and your future, are all ahead of you." She cried, but this time not the helpless sobbing of the past weeks. Tears fell, but her eyes were different, brighter. Something in her had broken, and something else had awakened. Parker came over and handed me his tablet. The neighbor's camera caught everything. He destroyed the house for nearly 3 hours straight. No mask, no attempt to hide. I watched each clip, every swing of his arm carving deeper into the truth. He wasn't just unstable, he had decayed. "Rachel," Parker said gently, "we've taken him into custody. He's in the holding facility now." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I want to see him," she said. I turned sharply. "No." But Parker looked at Rachel as if he understood something. Maybe that's exactly what she needs to end this. He was right. I had seen my daughter change. She was no longer the terrified woman from the months before. She needed to close this door herself, not with fear, but with her own voice. The city. Jail sat beside the old courthouse with cold concrete walls and pale neon lights. When Rachel stepped into the visitation room, I walked behind her, my hand resting lightly on her back. He was already sitting there, hands cuffed in front of him, his face tense, but his eyes still full of that arrogant confidence of a man who believed he was right. "Rachel," Cole said first, half relieved, half reproachful. "You came. I knew you would." "Not for the reason you think," Rachel replied, her voice small but solid as steel. I sat down next to my daughter but said nothing. This was her moment. Cole leaned forward, the cuffs clinking. "They're making all this up. Veronica is blowing things out of proportion. You know my mother, but I love you. You know that." Rachel looked at him for a long time, so calmly that it knocked the confidence out of Cole's eyes. "Cole, love never hurts," she said. He frowned. "What are you talking about? I did everything for you. I got angry because I love you. You've known that about me for years." Rachel shook her head. "No, you did it because you wanted control, because you thought I was your possession." Cole's face flushed red, his cuffed hands tightening. "I will get you back. I told you already. You belong to me." Rachel stood up, leaning down slightly so she could look him directly in the eyes. "That's why I came today. To tell you one thing." Cole held his breath. "I'm divorcing you." His whole body jerked. His eyes turned icy, like someone had thrown him into cold water. No, Rachel, you can't, you're not allowed." "I am allowed," Rachel said, soft but firm. "And I will." Cole slammed his hands on the table, the metal ringing sharply. "Rachel, that's not you. Someone is filling your head. I know you love me." "I used to think so," Rachel cut in. "But now I understand. Whatever that was, it wasn't love." There was a silence so heavy it felt like the air had hardened. Cole bent forward, breathing hard, like a man who had missed a step in the dark. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," Rachel added. "Thank you for that, because if you hadn't done all those terrible things, maybe I never would have seen myself clearly." I looked at my daughter, and I saw a new woman, someone who had walked out of ruins and stood on her own feet. Cole stared at us, his eyes red. He searched Rachel's face for something, hope, regret, a desire to come back, but there was nothing left for him. That was the last time they looked at each other as husband and wife. Rachel turned away first. I walked behind her, but before leaving, I looked at Cole one last time. He was hunched forward, his shoulders trembling, not from remorse, but from losing control. He no longer had any power over my daughter. When we stepped into the jail courtyard, the late afternoon sun slanted down, casting a warm golden band across Rachel's face. She tilted her head toward the sky, her eyes closing, as if for the first time in years she could breathe deeply, fully, without anyone choking the air out of her. "Mom," she said, "I feel like I just walked out of a locked room I'd been stuck in for too long." I held her hand and squeezed gently. "You didn't just walk out, Rachel. You closed the door on that darkness for good." She smiled. The first real smile since this all began. "I'm free," she whispered. I looked at her, my heart full of a deep gratitude I couldn't put into words. A chapter had closed, not just for Rachel, but for me too. Yet I knew one thing as clearly as I knew the red letters I once saw painted across my daughter's door. Rachel's freedom was only the beginning. The real fight was still coming. I always thought that when the day finally arrived, when the truth couldn't be buried anymore, I would feel relieved. But when I stepped into the courthouse for Cole's first hearing, what I felt wasn't victory. It was a fog, thick and cold, hanging over everything. The air felt tight, as if the entire room was holding its breath. Rachel sat beside me, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. But her face was calm, a calm only someone who has stared into the deepest dark and survived can possess. Cole was escorted in wearing an orange jumpsuit, nothing like the polished, confident man he once pretended to be. His posture was stiff, clumsy, like someone who wasn't used to no one opening doors for him anymore. When he saw Rachel, he froze. Just a moment, but enough for me to know he still didn't understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The judge called the court to order. The hearing began. The prosecutor played the neighbor's camera footage. Cole smashing windows, breaking furniture with a hammer, ripping apart the bed, tearing wedding photos, destroying gifts Rachel once gave him. 3 hours of chaos, 3 hours of hatred, 3 hours of the twisted love he always claimed justified everything. The whole courtroom went silent when the footage reached the part where Cole painted the red words, "I will take back what's mine." I saw Rachel shiver. I placed my hand over hers. "You don't belong to his darkness anymore," I whispered. When the defense attorney tried to argue temporary emotional instability, the prosecutor shut it down immediately. There was a history of abuse, threatening messages, evidence from the hidden cameras. And most importantly, Cole violated the restraining order just 3 days after it was issued. The judge struck the gavel. His voice was sharp and final. "Defendant Cole Matthews, the court sentences you to 5 years in prison and a permanent no-contact order with the victim." Cole shot up from his seat. "Rachel, say something. You know I did it because I love you." Rachel didn't turn back. She said only one sentence, quiet but cutting through. "The air like glass." That wasn't love. Those words split the room in two. Cole sank into his chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, there was no arrogance left. Officers led him away. Veronica stood up, her eyes burning into me like she wanted to tear my skin apart. "You destroyed my family," she hissed. I didn't tremble. I didn't lash back. I simply said, "You did that long before I came." Her face flushed, but no one stood beside her. Not a single person. The hearing ended, but I knew it was only the first chapter of their collapse. 2 months later, early fall chilled the air in Ohio. The trees along the road to the courthouse had begun turning yellow, but nothing about the day felt gentle. I sat in the larger courtroom holding Rachel's hand, with Parker behind us and Edward Matthews, thinner but clearer-eyed, seated beside his assigned security officer. The trial of Veronica Matthews, the event the entire city had whispered about for weeks. When Veronica entered, she no longer had her usual sharp, icy beauty. Her face was heavily made up but couldn't hide her fatigue. Still, her eyes held their familiar pride that insisted everyone else in the room was beneath her. The prosecutor began recounting the circumstances of Matthew Matthews' death, forensic inconsistencies, multiple bruises, signs of struggle, a rushed cremation with no secondary examination. Highly unusual for a wealthy family. Then the USB audio played. Veronica's voice filled the courtroom, clear and chilling. He deserved to die. I only pushed him a little. People gasped. A few shook their heads. No one spoke. Veronica shot to her feet, screaming, "That's edited. I never said that. This is a setup." Her lawyer paled, trying to pull her back down. But what truly shattered her defense was Edward's testimony. When he stood, the room froze. He gripped his cane, walking to the stand with all the strength he had left. "I stayed silent for 12 years, he said, voice shaking but not weak. "But today, I'll tell the truth." He spoke of the injuries he saw on Matthew, the loud arguments neighbors had overheard, the time Veronica blocked him from entering the house with an expression that froze his blood. The phone call from Matthew the night before he died. "Ed, I want a divorce. I'm afraid of Veronica." The room felt like all the air had been sucked out. Even the judge's face tightened. It was as if a buried truth had finally surfaced. At the end of his testimony, Edward's voice cracked. "My brother didn't die from a fall. He died because he lived beside a woman who believed she had the right to decide whether he lived or died." Veronica burst into tears, not of grief, but rage. "You betrayed the family, coward." Edward looked right at her. "I only regret not saving him." The verdict came 2 days later. Veronica Matthews was convicted of second-degree murder and obstruction of justice. Sentence, 12 years in prison. She screamed as officers cuffed her. You ruined everything. I'll never forgive you." I looked at her calmly, not triumphant, not smug, just honest. "Veronica," I said quietly, "I didn't destroy your family. You did." In that moment, her face twisted with hatred, and something in her eyes went hollow, like someone who finally realized the empire she built from manipulation and violence had collapsed beneath her feet. As she was escorted away, she looked back at the emptying courtroom. No allies, no friends, no relatives. Even those who once respected her avoided her gaze. I felt not joy, not victory, just a deep sadness for a family ruined at its roots. Rachel took my arm. "Mom, why don't I feel lighter?" I looked at her and gave a small, sad smile. "Because this is a tragedy, sweetheart. No one wins when a family has been broken for so long." She rested her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, we stepped out of the courthouse under a sky that was truly blue. Not the false blue of denial, but the blue of a new chapter opening, even though behind us we had closed one of the darkest chapters of our lives. I once thought that after Veronica and Cole were sentenced, everything would brighten instantly, like sunlight after a storm. But life moves in quieter rhythms. Consequences and changes don't arrive all at once. They seep in slowly like water into soil. And sometimes the most painful part isn't the confrontation itself, but the days that follow, when people must live with the choices they've made. One late fall morning, while I was making breakfast, Rachel walked into the kitchen with an envelope in her hand. Her expression wasn't panicked or sad, just hesitant. "Mom," she said, placing the envelope on the table. "A letter from Cole." I looked at her but didn't open it. "Do you want to read it?" Rachel inhaled softly as if gathering all her courage. "I already read it. Last night." I waited. She sat down across from me, her hands clasped together but no longer trembling like before. "He apologized," Rachel said. "Cole wrote that he finally understood why everything happened. He said growing up in that kind of environment made him believe control was love. jealousy was protection, and violence was a solution. He admitted he never truly knew what healthy love looked like. She paused for a moment, then concluded, but he also wrote that if I forgave him, he could change. And She lifted her head and looked at me, her eyes clear. I don't want to go back. I nodded. You don't have to forgive someone to be free. I know, I'm keeping the letter as a way to close the chapter, but I won't respond. I couldn't have been prouder of my daughter. News that Cole had written an apology reached Parker and even Edward. Everyone saw it as a good sign, not because they wanted Cole and Rachel back together, but because when a toxic man finally recognizes his own destruction, it usually means he no longer has the strength to hurt anyone else. But the consequences for the Matthews family didn't end with Cole and Veronica. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Parker. Linda, you need to hear this, he said. From Edward's testimony from the USB and from the financial documents the prosecutor had collected, the investigation expanded to other members of the Matthews family, those who had helped cover up Mr. Matthews' death or benefited from Veronica's wrongdoing. The cousin, a family member who secretly used company funds to hide assets. Another cousin who provided false testimony 12 years ago. One by one, they were called in for questioning. No one was arrested yet. But the shadow of truth had begun to fall over them. The Matthews empire did not collapse in a single day. It cracked, slowly and steadily, until everyone could see how rotten it truly was. But during that time, Rachel's life was healing like a lake settling after a storm. The day she received an email from an old friend, someone from the group who had once shunned her when the scandal broke, she simply read it silently, then handed it to me. Rachel, I'm sorry. I believed the wrong people. I joined in the cruel things said about you. I hope someday you'll allow me a chance to make it right. The next day, someone else messaged her, then 2 more. Then a group of friends invited her for coffee, not to check in with judgment, but with genuine sincerity. Rachel didn't immediately embrace them. She had grown. She now knew how to choose who deserved to walk beside her. The old house, the one Cole destroyed as if he wanted to erase Rachel's existence, was sold in just 6 days. Many friends asked why she didn't renovate it or stay to overcome the painful memories. Rachel only gave a sad smile. I don't want to live inside 4 walls that once trapped me. And I understood. Honestly, I didn't want her going back to a place that had eroded her freedom day by day. Rachel's new apartment was on the 4th floor of a bright building. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide window, spreading across the walls like a pale yellow cloth. I watched her arranging her belongings, the flower vase, the bookshelf, the green ceramic cups I had given her, and I realized, for the first time in a very long while, that her shoulders were no longer pulled tight in defense. My daughter was living, not merely surviving. And Veronica. The news of her stroke came to me on a weekend afternoon. Parker called, his voice low. She collapsed in her cell. A stroke. She survived, but half her body is paralyzed. I went silent. Rachel was making tea and turned toward me, worried. Mom, what's wrong? I sat down. Veronica had a stroke. Rachel said nothing. After a moment, she set the teapot on the table and exhaled softly. I'm not happy about it, she said, and I don't pity her either. She looked up, her eyes not hateful, just accepting. I just feel it's fair. Everything fell back into place in the end. I held her hand, and in that moment, I understood what I had always believed throughout my years as a lawyer. Cruelty destroys itself. We don't need to retaliate. We don't need to inflict more pain. The damage people like Veronica create usually circles back in ways no one predicts. In the days that followed, my home had more peace than ever. Morning bird song, Rachel reading in the armchair at night, sometimes resting her head on my shoulder like when she was little. We cooked together, tended the garden that had been neglected through months of exhaustion. No pounding on the door at midnight, no threats, no eyes watching from the dark, just quiet. A quiet I once believed I would never experience again. One afternoon, while Rachel was tending the balcony plants, she turned back to me and smiled. "Mom, we can breathe now." I nodded. I didn't say anything. Sometimes words cannot keep up with the feelings inside. Yes, we could finally breathe. Not because we had won, but because no fear was gripping our throats anymore. Life didn't become perfect, but it became right. And for me, that was enough. If there was a moment in my life that made me stop and take a deep, slow breath, it was the morning Rachel walked out the door wearing a pale blue blouse, her hair tied neatly back, holding the new bag she bought with her own salary. Her eyes were bright, truly bright, something I hadn't seen during the years she lived with Cole. The brightness of someone who had stepped out of a windowless room and realized the sky was wide. "I'll be okay, Mom," she said with a smile that wasn't forced. I nodded, standing on the porch, watching her descend the steps. No more darting glances, no more shrinking posture. Rachel was walking the way she used to as a child, soft but steady, as if the world beneath her feet finally had space for her. She had found a new job at a medical research center, where people greeted each other with smiles, where supervisors didn't need to shout to prove authority, and where Rachel first experienced something most people take for granted: respect. That evening when she came home, I asked, "How was it?" Rachel smiled, taking off her scarf, and said something that nearly brought me to tears. "I forgot what it feels like to be treated like a normal person, Mom." James Porter entered her life the way kindness often does, quietly, without drama, without the overwhelming intensity that makes people suspicious. He was a resident doctor in the same building Rachel worked in, a few years older, tall, broad-shouldered, gentle-faced, with a voice soft but steady. I met him for the first time at a small seminar when Rachel brought him over. "James, this is my Mom." He extended his hand, firm but not overbearing. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hawkins. Rachel talks about you all the time." I glanced at Rachel and saw her cheeks turn slightly pink, not the girlish kind of blush, but the quiet shyness of a grown woman learning to trust a new hand after being hurt for so long. Throughout the event, I observed James with the instinct of a mother who has witnessed the worst hidden behind a man's polite exterior. But James had none of the red flags I watched for. He didn't touch Rachel unless she invited it. He didn't answer questions on her behalf. He noticed when she was tired but never told her what to do. In short, he respected her boundaries. And that, to me, was as meaningful as any declaration of love. One late spring evening, Rachel came home looking conflicted. I saw it the moment she opened the door. "What happened, sweetheart?" She set her bag on the table, walked over, and sat beside me. "James proposed to me." I sat up straight. "And what did you say?" She bit her lip. "I told him I needed more time." I couldn't help but smile gently. "That's a grown-up answer." Rachel sighed and rested her head on my shoulder like she used to. "I love him, Mom, but I'm afraid of myself. I'm afraid I'm not fully healed, afraid the old shadows are still inside me, and I'll bring them into a new life without meaning to." I stroked her hair. "Rachel, Being grown doesn't mean having no wounds. It means knowing how to care for them when they return. You've already done that. You stood up, fought back, walked away when you needed to. You know your worth. You know your boundaries. That means you are healed, not because you forgot the past, but because you no longer let it decide your future. She squeezed my hand, and I felt it clearly. My daughter had truly stepped out of the darkness. One Sunday afternoon, while we were pulling weeds in the garden, Rachel suddenly said, "Mom, I want to tell my story." I froze. "You mean publicly?" Rachel nodded. "There are so many women still living in silence, Mom. I used to be one of them. I know what shame feels like, what fear feels like, what confusion feels like. I want them to know there's a way out. I want them to look at me and think, if she did it, maybe I can too." I looked at my daughter for a long time, the baby I once held when she was learning to walk, the woman I held when she shook after Cole's blows, the warrior who stood in front of her husband in a jail visitation room and said, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Now she wanted to turn pain into light. I squeezed her hand. "Then we'll tell it," I said, "together." James supported her completely. He listened to her plans without taking over, without inserting himself, without offering cliché lines like, "You're so strong." He simply asked, "What can I do to help you?" When Rachel told me that, she burst into tears, not from sadness, from being understood. There were afternoons when I watched Rachel and James tending the garden together or fixing a bookshelf. There were mornings when I heard Rachel laughing at something James said. That laughter, I once believed I would never hear again, and in those moments I realized the future doesn't arrive in loud, triumphant waves. It comes quietly through small things: safety, peace, respect, kindness. Rachel had found all of that, and I, finally, felt my own heart loosen. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rachel whispered, "Mom, I think I'm ready now." I knew exactly what she meant, and I smiled. "Then let the future lead the way." Rachel turned to me, her eyes shimmering the way they did when she was little. "Do you think I deserve happiness?" I took her hand. "You've deserved it for a long time, Rachel. You're only just beginning to believe it." That night, after Rachel and James left following dinner, I stood at the door watching them go, a peace settling in me so deep it surprised even myself. No more darkness hanging over this house. No more fear, no more threats, no more fighting alone. My daughter had been reborn, and somehow so had I. Our future wasn't a blazing, brilliant light, but a warm one, gentle enough to see the road ahead, steady enough to remind us every step was worthwhile. And for the first time in years, I believed we were not just surviving. We were truly living. I don't know what moment marked Rachel's clearest turning point. Was it when she bravely walked away from Cole? When she stood in front of the man who once paralyzed her with fear and said, "I want a divorce"? Or was it the calm moment she said she wanted to tell her story to help others? Maybe all of them. Or maybe it was that quiet morning when I opened the door to my study and found Rachel at her computer, shoulders relaxed, her gaze steady, as if she were finally doing something that belonged to her more than anything else ever had. "Mom," she looked up, her eyes naturally bright, "I think I'm going to start a blog." "A blog?" I asked, walking closer. Rachel nodded and turned the screen toward me. The website was empty, only one simple title at the top. "Finding Myself Again, Han Trin Tim Lai Chin Ming." I read each word slowly. No embellishment, no dramatics, just a gentle but weighty declaration from someone once broken who had now chosen to stand tall again. I want to tell the truth, Rachel said, her voice soft but steady, not to get revenge, but so that someone, just one person, might see the door I once couldn't see. I placed my hand on her shoulder. Then right, Rachel. You didn't just survive. You won. Her first post went up that evening. Within hours, the first comments appeared. Messages from strangers, mostly women, many using pseudonyms, some leaving only a heart, but enough to show me her story had not disappeared into the void. An email arrived after midnight from a woman in Michigan. I've never dared tell anyone that my husband controls my phone, my money, even my clothes. When I read your story, I saw myself. Thank you for speaking out. The next morning, 3 more emails, then 10, then 50. Rachel read each one, and every time she finished, she sat quietly for a moment, as if gathering the pain of others into her chest to understand, to share, to make sure none of it was overlooked. Watching her, I saw a woman whose personal suffering had become a fire, not to burn herself, but to warm others. As for me, I continued my work as before, but something fundamental shifted. My name began reaching women who saw me as a safe place. One young woman walked into my office on a Friday afternoon. "Mrs. Hawkins," she said, her hands clasped tightly, "I read your daughter's blog. I want to ask, do I have the right to leave?" Another called close to midnight. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I don't know who else to call." I'm no superhero. I don't have solutions for every kind of pain, but I know how to help them open the first door. The door leading out of the invisible walls that abuse builds. Rachel always said, "Mom, you were the foundation I stood on." But through this journey, I stood taller because of her, too. One early summer evening, Rachel walked into the living room with a manuscript nearly 200 pages thick. "What's this?" I asked. "My blog," she smiled, "but I think it needs to become something bigger." I smiled back, understanding immediately. "It'll be a book," I said. "Not just a book, Mom," Rachel said softly. "I want it to be a reminder for women who can't see a way out. I want them to know that the light doesn't disappear. Sometimes it's just hidden by someone else's shadow." I flipped through a few pages. There was Rachel's voice, gentle, patient, braver than ever. Suddenly I said, "I'm writing too." Rachel turned to me, wide-eyed. "What are you writing?" "A memoir, but not about law or victories. About motherhood. About the journey of learning not to lose myself while trying to protect someone else." She set her manuscript down and leaned her head on my shoulder. "Let's do it together?" I nodded, and in that moment I realized we had moved into a new chapter. No longer survivors running from pain, but women standing still, facing it, then shaping it into strength. One gentle Sunday morning, we decided to visit my husband's grave after nearly a year. The cemetery was quiet, lined with maple trees, unmoving in the still air. I brought white lilies, the kind he used to buy me on days that weren't special to anyone but him. Standing before the headstone, Rachel bent down to place the flowers, her hand trembling slightly. Her voice was small but clear. "I'm okay now, Dad." A breeze lifted a few strands of her hair. Sunlight filtered through the trees, falling across her face, making her look both strong and pure. I placed my hand on her back, my chest tightening. "He's proud of you," I whispered, "of both of us." We stood there a long time without speaking. In that silence, I felt my husband's warmth, as quiet, steady, and gentle as he had always been in our lives. On the drive home, Rachel turned to me, her eyes bright with a sudden understanding. "You know, if I hadn't gone through all of that, Maybe I wouldn't be who I am today, and I wouldn't be able to help those women. I took her hand. Suffering should never be the price for becoming strong, I said. But when it happens, how we rise, that's what defines us. Rachel smiled. I rose because of you. I looked at my daughter for a long moment, then answered through a tightening in my throat. No, Rachel, you rose because of yourself. I only lit the path. And for the first time in this long, winding journey, I realized both of us had found our new purpose, not to end a battle, but to begin a healing journey for others, a mission born from love, pain, and a light that even the deepest darkness could never extinguish. I spent nearly a year finishing the final draft of the memoir, a book I had first intended to write only for myself, but eventually realized it belonged to far more people than just me. It belonged to the women living in silence the way Rachel once did. It belonged to the mothers who had sat alone in the dark, breathless with worry because their daughters hadn't called. It belonged to those trapped in relationships where love had become nothing more than a mask for control and violence. The day I placed the last period on the manuscript, I reread the opening line, a sentence I had written with everything left in me after a long, exhausting but beautiful journey. If our story helps even one person, then all the pain was worth it. It wasn't poetic, it was the truth. A truth I had lived, witnessed, and chosen to believe in. Because in the midst of fear, in the cruelty of those who use power to harm, in the nights when I thought I would collapse, it was the understanding of strangers that kept us standing. Now I wanted to give that back to someone else. I dedicated the final chapter of the book to something I hadn't been able to say out loud for many years. That kind love is a right, not a gift. No one should have to endure, fear, or accept abuse in any form. No one should live under excuses like, I did it because I love you. And no mother should have to watch her child wither under a love that was never real. I wrote, you deserve kindness. You deserve a love that doesn't ask you to give up yourself just to survive. When Rachel read those lines, she didn't say a word. She simply walked over, wrapped her arms around me from behind, and rested her head on my shoulder for a long time. It was both a thank you and a reminder of how far we had come. Life after that was no longer loud, no more late-night phone calls, no more strange cars parked outside the gate, no more jolting awake at small noises. Rachel reclaimed her life, piece by piece, habit by habit, each morning with birdsong and a cup of coffee she made herself, each afternoon where she looked in the mirror and didn't see shame or fear. And I found the peace I had believed was lost forever. We kept our Sunday ritual, sitting in the garden, watching the sun sink behind the trees. In the early days, it was where we whispered about the pain. Now, it was where we revisited the past with a strange tenderness, not to forget, but to remember differently, softer, warmer, more grateful. I think I'm healed, Mom, Rachel said one evening as the wind carried the scent of lavender across the yard. I turned to her and smiled. You're not just healed, Rachel. You've bloomed. She laughed gently, her eyes shimmering as though they held the whole evening sky. The day my memoir was ready to send to the publisher, I sat before my computer and wrote the final note. Not a blessing, not a farewell, but a message for whoever would step into this story next, someone like you, listening to me recount this journey from beginning to end. I wrote, if you've read this far, where are you standing in your own story? What did this journey touch inside your heart? If you want to share, I'm here. I'm listening. because I know there are stories that just need a place to be spoken so they no longer stay buried in the dark. I added, "Thank you, whoever you are, for spending the time to walk with me and my daughter through each page. Not everyone has the patience, and even fewer have the courage to stay through a story like this. And that is the truth. Not everyone dares to stay until the end of someone else's wounds." I closed the manuscript and inhaled deeply. I had written it, and now, instead of leaving those words only inside a book, I want to speak them to you, the person hearing me in this moment. Please share your thoughts below or your own story if you feel ready. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you can join me on more healing journeys. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. I looked up and saw Rachel standing at the doorway watching me with warm, loving eyes. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm proud of you." I smiled. My tears fell, not from pain or fear, but from knowing we had walked through a darkness so profound it once felt endless, and somehow we still made it here, to a place with light, with kindness, with peace. I close the story. I am Linda Harrington, a mother who saved her daughter, and a woman who found herself again. And if you're somewhere out there listening, remember that you too can find your light anytime, whenever you're ready.